Hey guys, and welcome back to Heebie-Jeebies TV, and this is where true crime meets the other side. We are completely obsessed on this channel with talking about the unsolved. Now that could mean true crime, strange mysteries that we don't really have an explanation to, or even the straight up paranormal. Now, I know I have been away for quite a bit. Life has been a little bit hectic. I did have a baby, so that has been taking up a lot of time. But now that I'm starting to have a little bit more free time, I want to come back to the channel and actually also launch a podcast at the same time. So I'm going to be starting with the Spotify podcast. I believe that one allows me to upload it to a bunch of different podcast streaming platforms. So once I get all that figured out, I'll have everything linked in the description box below. But I definitely feel like it's time for me to start a podcast. I've been seeing a lot of your comments on TikTok. I'm very much still active there, but the biggest comment I keep seeing from people is that everybody wants me to start a podcast, and that seems to be because everyone likes my monotone voice. People either love it or hate it. So I'm gonna go with it, see how it goes, and just get to creating content all over again. Now, if you guys do hear my dogs in the background, I do apologize. He has a very loud bark. I'm sure you guys can hear him. I do try to keep him as quiet as possible, but sometimes he's just a very stubborn dog. He's like 10 years old now, and he just barks when he wants to. So I do apologize. All right. So let's get into today's story. Now, I want to talk about this very strange disappearance, and it's an older case. It's an unsolved case from 1994, and we're actually going to a Canadian city called Vancouver. Now, this is going to be the disappearance of Nick and Lisa Masee. So the year was 1994, and like I said, we're going to Vancouver, specifically to an area in Vancouver called North Vancouver. Now, this was a very family-oriented suburb of the city where crime is essentially non-existent. This would have been a perfect place to raise your family, especially in the 90s. So this begs the question, how does a couple mysteriously disappear from their home without a trace? To this day, no one has any idea where they went, what exactly happened, let alone why. Of course, there are plenty of questions. Was this foul play or was it voluntary? So let's get into the story. What could have possibly happened to this couple? And at the end of the video, I want you guys to tell me what you guys think happened to Nick and Lisa Masee. All right, so let's begin with the main characters of the story. You guys already heard me mention them. We'll start with Nick Masee. So he was a private banker. He had a pretty big job, an important job for the Bank of Montreal. He was a very successful guy by all means. He had climbed the corporate ladder for his entire career. He had an extensive network. He had many wealthy clients, and he was just generally well known across Vancouver. And although many people said that they did know him, there were just as many people that described him being as a very private sort of person. However, in an affidavit from his daughter that we will later talk about in the story, she stated that he was a very open guy. He very much enjoyed sharing details of what was happening in his life and his work. Other than that, we know that he had 2 children, of course, his daughter that I just mentioned, and his son who was living in Japan at the time of his disappearance. Then we have his wife, Lisa Masee. So she was originally from China and was then at the time a hairstylist at a shop called Yakoi Hair Design located on Cambie Street, which actually still exists today. And this is where the pair had met 10 years prior in 1994. Nick had been one of Lisa's clients. Both of them had been married before, and obviously those marriages did not work out. And the pair would go on to get married, and together they created this sort of idyllic life, the kind of life that you kind of just hope you would have as you get older, a very chill life. You get to spend, your money doing things that you love. They had a beautiful home in North Vancouver. And let's talk about their home a little bit. Their home was located on Delmar Court and Monterey Avenue. And if you're watching the YouTube video of this, I'll put up some pictures of the home so you can see what I'm talking about. It was right on the corner of the neighborhood streets. It was in a quiet area. It seemed to have a very large plot. There was plenty of green space. Just overall, a really nice home, especially for two older people that didn't have any younger kids anymore. It was just a really good space for them. Now, like I mentioned earlier, the couple enjoyed socializing around town, and because they did have a lot of disposable income, they were able to travel quite often. But they did have their favorite hotspots that they would go to. So these were Hawaii, where they had a timeshare. They would also go to the Cayman Islands and the Netherlands, which was Nick's home country. All of this was thanks to Nick's, pretty impressive salary at the time. He was making $85,000 in 1994, which in today's money would be equivalent to approximately $163,000 in Canadian dollars. It's not, it's not a millionaire's salary, but it's a decent salary, especially for two adults. It would have allowed them to live a very comfortable life. Not to mention that Nick's background in banking had also allowed him to make many different investments and save quite a bit of money for retirement, which is exactly what Nick decided to do in 1994. He retired. But shortly after, the pair started acting really out of character for them. In April of 1994, the couple went on an unplanned trip to the Cayman Islands. They didn't tell their families about it. It was only discovered after the fact, which was very bizarre. And on this trip, they had set up foreign bank accounts and had deposited approximately $50,000, and they also had their wills drawn up during this trip. Then there was a very strange phone call that Nick made to his daughter. Now, she was living in the Netherlands at the time, and she answered the phone call. And they spoke for a little bit, and Nick went on to tell her that he was not going to be able to call her on her birthday, which was on April 23rd. He didn't tell her where he was. He didn't offer any sort of explanation as to why he wouldn't be able to call her. He always made a thing about calling his daughter on her birthday. So this was definitely very bizarre. Then, in August of 1994, another strange situation came up. During the first week of August, Nick received a phone call from a man claiming he wanted to invest in a company called Turbodyne. Now, although Nick was retired, this was a company that Nick served as a director for, and it was based out of California, and it also traded on the Vancouver Stock Exchange. There was also a very popular restaurant at the time in Vancouver, specifically in the Cole Harbour area. Now today, this is a very trendy, upscale part of town. And this restaurant was called Trader Vic's. It also happened to be one of Nick's favorite restaurants. And this is where he was planning on meeting this investor to discuss a deal that was worth approximately $10 million. However, to this day, the identity of this mysterious investor remains a mystery. A lot of this information comes from a former business associate of Nick, but also a private investigator that we'll go into a little bit later. Now, they would reveal that this mysterious investor had planned to send Nick a limo to pick up Nick and Lisa from their home in North Vancouver for their meeting. However, it was later discovered that the reservation turned into a no-show. No one arrived to the restaurant for this supposedly very important meeting that was supposed to take place at 6:30 p.m. Again, this was out of character for Nick, especially to those that worked in the restaurant. Now, because he frequented this restaurant often, he was familiar with a lot of the staff, so they definitely knew him. And they made a thing of mentioning that if he knew he was not going to be able to make the reservation, he would have definitely called ahead to cancel. But that wasn't it. They also revealed that the reservation had been changed multiple times. Originally, it was scheduled for 6:30 p.m., but Nick called and then changed it to 4 p.m. And then again, he called to change it to 8 p.m. So the question here is, why go through all that trouble to schedule a reservation, change it a few times, and then just be a no-show? But then an eyewitness would later come forward and claim that they saw both Nick and Lisa next door to Trader Vic's at the Bayshore Inn, which is now a Westin hotel. This witness claimed he saw the pair in the garden lounge of the hotel between 6:30 and 10:30 p.m. He described Nick wearing a jogging tracksuit sort of thing, and he also said that both of them were sharing a bottle of wine. The following morning, on August 11th, which also happened to be Lisa's 39th birthday, she made 2 phone calls using Nick's cell phone. And yes, I know what you're thinking. Cell phones did exist in 1994. However, they were not like the ones we have today. They were very big and bulky. Not everyone had them. Now, Lisa, the first phone call that she made was to her boss, and then the second phone call was to one of Nick's associates. She told both of them that they would both be out of town for several days, but she gave both of them different reasons. She had told her boss that she had been called to a court case, so she would need to be in court for several days and wouldn't be able to come into work. She then told Nick's associate that they were just going to be out of town for several days. But she did tell both of these people that they would be back by August 16th. And that was the last time anyone heard from the Masees. After no one had heard from the Masees for about a week, including Lisa's mother, her side of the family started to get very worried. This was again out of character. So she asked Lisa's sister Loretta to go check on the couple, to go to their home, do essentially a welfare check. When she got there, she noticed that Nick's car was in the driveway and that the front door was closed, but when she went to open it, surprisingly, it was unlocked. Their alarm system was also disabled, another strange and out of character thing for the couple. Even stranger, their cat, whose name was Spider, was left home alone. This was so bizarre. This was something that Nick would never do, according to his son. His son would go on to explain that Nick absolutely adored this cat. He treated this cat like a child, and for him to just abandon the cat in the home without any food or water for days just did not make any sense. As she was going through the home, she also discovered their passports and 2 zip ties that were left at the front entrance of the home. But other than that, the home was in pretty good condition. There was no signs of a burglary. There was no signs of anyone breaking and entering. No signs of a disturbance, which was very odd to say the least. So at this point, the investigation launches and authorities are quickly stumped. There were very little leads for them to go off of. There was no evidence at the home aside from those zip ties and their passport. And the biggest piece was this mysterious meeting and their odd behavior in the months leading up to their disappearances. If the couple was hiding something, like many people alluded to, they did a really good job of it because no one had any clue as to what they could have possibly been hiding. Now, police did look into their bank accounts, and both of them were completely untouched from the moment they disappeared. And as for their passports, that also raises a lot of questions. How far could they have possibly gone without their passports? So without much to go on, Nick's son, who was called Nick Jr., hired a private investigator to work on the case. And this private investigator's name was Ozzy Caban. The two would later have a falling out based on what he could conclude during his investigation. It was suggested by Ozzy that Nick Masee was into some sort of shady business because of a business associate he once knew. This person in question was called Fred Hoffman. He was an accountant that was accused of stealing $10 million of his client's money before disappearing himself. Now, it's easy to see why Nick's son would be so offended by something like this. According to him, his father was a straight-up guy. He would never do anything like this. He said he was a conservative. He would just never be caught up in some sort of shady business like that. The last thing Ozzy was able to uncover was that the day before the couple disappeared, they had attended a funeral where Nick was visibly distraught, and he was heard telling someone that he would be leaving town or that he needed to get out of town. So as far as his conclusion goes, he believes that the Masees were running from something, but what that is, we don't exactly know. Authorities, on the other hand, just want to focus on the facts, and according to them, it boiled down to two main theories. Either the couple wanted to disappear on their own, and the only reason people pay attention to this theory is because of Nick's background in banking and the amount of money he had saved up, investments, his salaries. It would be easy to see how they would have had the funds to create false identities, leave on their own, and start a brand new life. Now, the second theory is that these two were targeted due to some form of criminal activity. Although the authorities did make it clear, they did state that neither one of them led a life that was typical of being high risk. So what are the other theories? Well, a leading theory suggests that they did run away on their own accord simply because they owed too much money. Their home was on a mortgage. They owed approximately $70,000 in credit cards. I did read a few reports on different numbers as to how much their mortgage was. I've seen them go between $500,000 and $600,000, but there's no concrete answer that I was able to confirm with. Some suggest that they were taking on a lot more debt than they could afford in order to portray a certain lifestyle towards the network and just the friends that they had in Vancouver. Another theory also banks off the debt angle, but it suggests that they borrowed money from the wrong people, and because they were probably not able to pay it back, they had to pay for it with their lives, hence the zip ties being found at the house. Now, if you ask Nick's kids about what they think, they believe that both Nick and Lisa are no longer alive. It doesn't make sense to them that they would just voluntarily leave their lives behind and never contact either one of them. And although they did say that time has made it easier for them to let go of the situation, they do believe that time heals all wounds. They are still hopeful that one day they are going to find some sort of answer. But as far as the investigation goes, authorities have said that this case is still open, but it's currently inactive because they've pursued all of the viable leads at this point. So if you know anything about what happened to Nick and Lisa Masee from North Vancouver, I'm going to put some contact information in the caption, in the description box below, that you guys can contact if you have any important information that you want to share. All right, well, that's it for today's case, guys. Let me know what you think about what happened to Nick and Lisa Masee. I have a feeling that they are no longer with us. I do agree that I find it very odd that they would not contact their children. Well, at least Nick wouldn't contact his children, especially now that this has been going on for over 30 years. I have a feeling they are no longer with us, but as for the reason why they were taken out, I do not know. It's hard to say without having more information. But like always, let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and I will see you in the next video.